Today we're braising pork belly with scallions, and we'll take the opportunity to talk about pork skin and pork fat. We start with the belly. In a very hot pan with a very generous amount of high smoke point neutral oil, they go in for the Maillard reaction, which would make them meaty, and later on caramelization, which would give us nutty complexity. And they're going in flesh side down. We'll later brown the sides, but not the skin. Why? To answer that, we need to know what the skin is actually made of. We first have a very thin protective layer that is mostly protein, followed by a second layer that is rich in collagen and other connective tissues, then followed by a layer of fat. If you were to sear them before braising, layers 1 and 2 would rapidly dehydrate and form a crust. Although it's crispy looking, it'll end up creating a barrier, slowing down moisture reabsorption. So once braised down, you'll get a wrinkled, relatively tough and chewy skin. Without searing, the low and slow cooking would gradually soften and slowly melt the layer of collagen into mouth-coating, silky gelatine, enriching the whole braise. Most of the fat by then would have been rendered, so what you see as the layer of fat and skin at the end is mostly connective tissue, not fully rendered, giving it structure and a pleasant bite. And that's why a properly braised piece of pork belly should be rich, but not heavy. Once everything is pretty much golden brown, except for the skin, we start the braising process right away, skipping the sautéing of the aromatics, knowing full well we will have our aromatic base when we make the scallion oil later. So everything is optional. Star anise for some warmth and licorice-like aroma, and star anise and braised meat work so well together. Ginger for some heat, for some zesty freshness, and to tame whatever unwanted gaminess from the pork. Any scallion offcuts you have, if you have the roots, amazing. If you don't, just tie a few for some aromatic depth and subtle sweetness. Once again, optional, coriander. Cooked coriander developed such a deep, complex, earthy, herbaceous note that would really round out the flavors of this dish. And our source of salinity and umami, light soy sauce. Don't worry about the color too much at this stage. We'll build our colors later with the scallion. Now, just enough water to cover everything. Deglassing the pan at the same time. Bring this back to a boil, lid on, and we let this simmer for 2 hours. Just enough time to extract most of the rendered pork fat, which we'll use to make our scallion oil and finish the braising process. I'll see you then. After 2 hours, we have this beauty. Look at that. Now, we start skimming off the fat, and by now the fat would have taken on a lot of the fat-soluble flavors of everything that's in this pot, giving us a foundation to build on. Perfect. Now we prep the scallion. If you want to go for a more old-school approach, use scallion only. But today, just to give us a bit more depth and volume, we're also going to use a bit of shallots. So very simple. For this recipe, we just want the white part of the scallion. That's where most of the mild onion-like flavors are. We simply slice them in half, lengthwise. And we then portion them so you get a decent bite size. These will be extremely tasty, so we're not throwing any of that away. The tiny ones, you can leave them whole. Shallots, just sliced. Perfect. Now, hot pan, we first add our pork fat. A bit of liquid is okay because that will evaporate. You just don't want too much, otherwise it'll start splashing. And of course, depending on your yield and how fat your bellies are, we top up with a very generous amount of high smoke point neutral oil. Scallion and shallots in. What we essentially want to do is to extract all of the fat-soluble flavors, the subtle onion-like flavors and sweetness we talked about. And through heat, we evaporate their water content to concentrate their flavors so that whatever's remain is very, very concentrated, water-soluble flavors, which we'll then take advantage of with our braising liquid. And we want to gently take them to golden brown and slightly crispy on the edges. Bit of Maillard reaction, bit more complexity, and a bit of those slightly roasted notes. Now, after about 8-9 minutes at medium heat, you have this golden color, slightly crispy texture, and the whole room should smell like charred leek by now. Stove off, everything through a sieve to extract the oil and separate the solids. And we press this down slightly to squeeze out the excess oil. Perfect. Now, how do we use the oil? Normally, at this point, I would go off-piste and start making a roux. But today, we pay homage to Shandong cuisine, which popularized and perfected both the scallion oil and scallion braising in general. By stir-frying plain sugar with this very flavorsome oil to create what's called a sugar color. In essence, a caramelized glaze that we'll use to glaze our pork belly and thicken the sauce in the process. And we stir to make sure the bottom doesn't catch. Once we have this scallion-infused caramel, we lower the heat and very gently, very slowly, start incorporating a bit of our cooking liquid. In this case, we're using Shaoxing wine for a bit more depth and umami. You can use dry sherry, and you can use just water. Just like a roux, we slowly work the caramel. Now we can invite our pork belly back to the party, making contact with the sugar color in the process. Now we baste our pork belly, distributing scallion sweet goodness everywhere. Just like that, no need for dark soy sauce. Look at that. Wonderful. Now, all these crispy bits, they go back in to impart the water-soluble flavors. And of course, needless to say, they are extremely tasty in their own right. Now to finish the braise, we add back some of our extremely flavorsome cooking liquid. And we simply let the flavors melt together and reduce this down to your desired consistency. Look at that. And that is scallion braised pork belly.